Welcome to the webinar on Hibernate and Spring features. We'll try to do a small session on how we can use Hibernate along with Spring and leverage the benefits of both at the same time, right? Let's get started. As part of this webinar today, we'll have a presentation and we'll also see a small demo on how Spring and Hibernate work together. Okay, so objective basically of this webinar is that you understand on a high level what Spring and Hibernate frameworks are, and then how they work together, and what's that connection between them, what's Hibernate's purpose and what's Spring's purpose, right? And then what is one concept of Spring that relates to Hibernate called transaction management, okay, and then a demo. So this is the content of the webinar for today. Okay, it's going to be a 60-minute webinar, and I'll take up questions after that. Okay, so meanwhile during the session you can just type in as you get, and I'll take all of them at once. Okay. So just moving on, Hibernate basically is an object relational mapping. ORM is object relational mapping framework. Okay, found in 2001. Okay, so basically it is used for transparent persistence of Java objects into the relational database. Okay, so basically prior to Hibernate it was all JDBC, right? So how do we use JDBC? There is no relation between a JDBC table and or database table with a Java program or Java world, right? So Hibernate tried to bring close in that gap between a Hibernate database table and a Java class, right? So what Hibernate does is you can talk to any database in a language that any object-oriented programming developer understands, right? So if not Hibernate, how you do it is using plain queries, running them using JDBC, right? So the challenge, one of the key challenges with that approach is, let's say today, I know JDBC allows you to connect to any kind of database, right? Be it MySQL, or it could be Oracle, DB2, anything. JDBC has drivers for each database possible, right? Okay, so let's say your application is built using JDBC. And your application is connecting to a certain database, right? So tomorrow there is an organizational decision or a design decision at a level that you cannot control, right? And you are supposed to change your database, applications database, right? All the database persistence layer of your application is subject to change. Okay. With that approach, the JDBC approach, all of the persistent layer is subject to change. Okay, so that was one of the problem areas which we can overcome using Hibernate. Okay, with Hibernate, it allows you to switch from one database to other. So basically, your application becomes a database agnostic application. Okay, so that's one thing. And the second key advantage of Hibernate is that let's say you're connecting to the DB2. Okay, you need to understand DB2 syntax or learns DB2 syntax, or take Java, right? Sorry, take Oracle. So you need to understand Oracle's SQL syntax, right? So it's not humanly possible to learn all the SQL syntaxes, right? So Hibernate again comes into rescue there to not learn any database centric or specific syntaxes. Okay, you just learn HQL or Hibernate, or you can just learn entire Hibernate, and it takes care of handling all, or it basically converts your query into the database specific query. Okay, into a query language that your particular database can understand. So these are key problem areas that are solved by using Hibernate. Okay, so another key advantage is the last one, provide solutions for object relational impedance mismatch problems. Okay, so you are talking about object-oriented programming. Okay, but and you want to relate. What we try to do in Hibernate is you want to map an SQL table with a Java class and a row in the table to a object in Java world. Okay, just remember a table with a class and an object with a row in the database. That's how you map. Okay, but the question comes here is, in Java you are talking about object orientation, where you have inheritance, polymorphism, encapsulation, all these concepts, right? And in the relational world, in the relational database world, you don't have these concepts. Okay, you could relate a class with a table and an object with a row, but how would you relate inheritance in Java to something in DB world, or polymorphism in the Java world, in the object-oriented world, into the database world? So that problem is also solved by Hibernate. Okay, that's what I meant by solving the object relational impedance mismatch issues. Okay, Hibernate has come up with an approach to solve those mismatch issues as well. Okay, so that's about, on a high level, about Hibernate. Okay, and coming to the other part, right, Spring, right? So till now, Hibernate, whatever we're talking about Hibernate, right? It's primarily used in the persistence layer or DAO layer of your application. Okay, so there are alternatives to Hibernate, like you have Ibatis, you have JPA, you have JDBC, you have Spring JDBC, right? All these are different alternatives to Hibernate. Okay, so now Spring, where it comes into picture is in the service layer. Okay, as I said, right, Hibernate is in the DO layer. Likewise, in the J2E layered or multi-tiered applications, right, Spring comes into picture in the service layer primarily. Okay, Spring framework as in is very vast. Okay, it's a vast framework which has modules across the J2E stack. Okay, you could use it in the front end presentation tier, Spring MVC. You have Spring IOC, you have AOP, you have transaction management, you have JDBC, you have Spring Social, Spring Data, Spring whatnot. You go to Spring framework and you find all the modules, but the popularity or the major use of Spring is in the service layer. Okay, in the enterprise applications, that's where it's primarily used. Okay, so the right combinations that people do right now is to use Spring MVC in the presentation layer, Spring IOC, AOP in the service layer, and either use Hibernate or Spring JDBC in the DAO layer. Okay, so this is a current de facto standard that is employed in the current organizations. Okay, so it imperatively, what it means is any Java developer would be expected to have kind of awareness on these frameworks. Okay, so coming back to Spring, right? Like Hibernate, it is also an open source framework. Okay, and what it does is basically Spring is all based on loose coupling, a concept called loose coupling. Okay, so you don't want to get tied to something. That's what the concept of Spring is. You should allow modules to independently work with each other, right? So have as much loose coupling as possible. That's what the concept of Spring. Whichever module you take, the concept of Spring is all about that. Okay. Okay, let me just go off the topic and talk about structs, right? Structs. The major drawback why people are moving from structs into Spring is this coupling piece, right? If you're using structs, you have to depend on some structs library. I mean, your classes directly have to depend on structs libraries, basically, right? So that's the reason Spring actually has the brownie points, right? You don't have to have that tight coupling between the Spring framework and your application code. Okay, your code is in, I mean, you're in your code, if you look at the code, right, you might not see a tight coupling, or you don't have to extend any Spring classes, I would say, in other words, right? You actually inject the dependency of Spring at runtime, or basically you don't actually do it in a program, in your code. Okay, so the key module of Spring is IOC. The full form of IOC is inversion of control, which basically means, in other words, it's also called as dependency injection. Okay, so what basically IOC is, let's say there are two modules which are dependent on each other, right? Instead of you creating an object of one class in another, okay, you maintain some other XML, Spring XML, where you define the dependency. So basically, instead of hard coding the dependencies in the classes, you specify the dependencies elsewhere. Okay, you write class A, you write class B, specify the dependency somewhere else. Okay, if without Spring, you'll have to define the dependencies there itself, there and wherever you're using it, right? With Spring, you define the dependencies outside the classes. That's the benefit. Okay, the benefit you're getting it is, let's say you want to switch the dependency from A to B, instead of A to B, you want to switch from A to C. You don't make any code changes here. You change the dependency in the configuration. Okay, so you obviously, right, whenever you want to do use configuration, right, you use properties files or some kind of XMLs or something to take it out of your Java code and maintain the configurable parameters there, right? So the frequently changing things are some things that you maintain in a properties file. So it was just limited to that till Spring came into picture. Okay, with Spring, even the dependency between two components is maintained in an XML or in a configuration file. Okay, so that will allow you to change the dependencies from one class to another class. That's the key benefit of IOC. Okay, okay, and then since we have talked about at a high level about Spring and Hibernate in separate, okay, now we'll talk about how these two are interrelated. Okay, so how can Spring and Hibernate work together, right? So you can use, I mean, again, I'm telling you that you can use Hibernate without Spring or Spring without Hibernate. Okay, the good part is that when you use both of them together, you get the benefits of both of them. That's it. Okay, so Spring library has some support added for Hibernate. Okay, that's the part that will help you to use Spring with Hibernate. Okay, that's the reason only. That's the only reason why it is possible for you to use Spring with Hibernate. Okay, so Spring library has provided some extensions to work with Hibernate. That's the only reason it is possible. Okay, so if I have to talk about Hibernate and Spring implementations, right, we can see that in a demo on how what are the components of Spring application, and what are the components or what are the different files that you have in a Hibernate application. Okay, Okay, so you'll understand that this piece using Spring with Hibernate in the demo part. Okay, so there is one more concept that I want to cover as part of this session called transaction management. Okay, so transaction management uh, is very important, obviously, in any application, any Java J2E application. It's not, if not Java J2E application, any enterprise application, I would say. Okay, so what is transaction? Before going into what is transaction management, so what is transaction? Okay, basically transaction is a unit of work. Okay, so basically when you are saying unit of work, right? Let's talk about some database operations, right? So let's say you are trying to book a movie ticket. As an example, right? You want to book a movie ticket. The first step is to select the movie that you want to go, and the second step is to select the seat that you want to take, and the third step is to do the payment, right? And then fourth step is to take the add-ons or whatever, and then you provide your credit card details, and then you pay it, right? This is a workflow kind of thing or step-by-step process, right? So let's say you have done all these steps, but your payment failed. Okay, so the seat that you have blocked, right? The seat that you have blocked should be released since your payment has failed, right? So these are mutually dependent operations. The seat has to be confirmed only when the payment is confirmed. If the payment fails, the seat has to be rolled back. So they're dependent tasks. So they cannot actually live without each other. Those two operations cannot live without each other. So that's when you do it, you perform those two things in a transaction. Transaction means you enclose, you demarcate a set of operations. What am I demarcating here in a transaction? Select the movie, select the seat, take the payment, process payment. Okay, these are the 4 steps, 4 operations that I am including in a transaction. Okay, if any of them fails, all the others has to fail. You have to go back to the initial state, the state where you started off. Okay, if it fails at 3rd step, go back to 0. 4th step, go back to 0. 2nd step, go back to 0. In either steps it fails, you have to go back to 1st step. That's what transaction management is. Okay, so you can do that. You can do that in 2 ways. I see some comments or questions that you cannot hear me. Is it still an issue or is it fine now? Can someone please confirm? Okay, thank you. Do you want me to repeat what I said, or is that okay? Does anyone want me to repeat? I can do that. Okay, I saw a couple of repeats, so kindly bear others who already got that, please. But I'm just doing it because I felt it is really important. Okay, so basically what I meant by transaction is you want to set a demarcation, right? So I was explaining about a movie ticket booking process, right? You select the movie, you select the seat, and then you provide your payment details, and then payment processing. These are the 4 steps. Okay. What I mean to say is these 4 operations are part of a transaction. Why they are part of a transaction is because if the payment fails, the seat selection has to fail, has to be rolled back. The seat that has been selected has to be released. Okay. Okay. I hope you got what transaction means, right? There are 2 ways basically you can achieve that functionality. Okay, here also in the program also you will write in the application you write an update query, an insert query, and an update query on another table, and an insert query on another table. So these are the four database operations that you want to perform. Let's say, okay, what you do is you perform these four database transactions, database operations in a transaction. What you will do is you will say start transaction. Okay, update DB, insert DB, update DB, insert DB. You do some database operation. End the transaction. Okay, you will say end the transaction. So that means this is how you programmatically implement it. Okay, so to achieve transaction management. Okay, so there are two ways of doing it. One is you can let your container decide on how to do the transaction management, or you can do it yourself by writing code. Okay, so there are two approaches that you can take. Okay, there are positives and negatives for both the approaches. Those are called programmatic transaction management and declarative transaction management. Okay, programmatic transaction management means it is managed by the code, and the other is by the container, or you specify that in the XML or an annotation. It is not part of your code. You will not see it in the Java class. Okay, and then in easier words, right? When you're doing your development, programmatic transaction is easier. When you're doing your when your application is already live in production running and you have to maintain, then you would feel okay. If I had declarative transaction management, it would have been easier. So once your code is live and it is running in production, then you would prefer declarative. But when you are doing your development, you would prefer doing it in programmatic transaction. Okay, so the programmatic transaction is hard to maintain but easier to develop. But declarative is easier to develop. Difficult to develop but easier to maintain. Okay, it's just the reverse of it. Okay, so you can use Spring's feature called AOP for implementing transaction management. Okay, so Spring AOP is a module from Spring, basically, where you can actually try to address a cross-cutting concerns across the application. Let's say you have something across your application, like logging, exception handling, right? Or let's say you do some functionality, or let's say you take a financial application, right? For every operation that you do, right, they might want to charge you, right? So that's called billing, right? So billing is across the modules of the application. So if there is across the application, if you have some functionality, you can implement that using Spring AOP. AOP is basically something that can actually address your cross-cutting concerns across the application. Okay, so you can use, because this transaction management is something that you have to something you need across, or let's say for multiple modules in your application, then you can use AOP in that case as well. Okay, so for the next few minutes, you'll be seeing a demo of using Spring with Hibernate. Okay, so this is an example Maven application built using Maven. A small simple application. Okay, what I'm trying to do is to connect. I have MySQL installed on my machine. This particular application is going to connect to MySQL database and perform the database operation. Okay. So what I have here is a course class. Okay. So course class, which is just a normal plain folio, right? I have just 3 properties: ID, name, and price with their getter, setters, and a constructor. I don't have anything else, right? This is a folio that maps to a table in the database called course. Okay, where do I maintain the mapping between the folio class and the table? It's in the hbm.xml. Okay, so Hibernate world, you have a file called hbm.xml. Okay, so here you specify the mapping. In this file, you specify the mapping between your database table with your Java class, Pojo class, and the columns of your table against the properties of your class. Okay, I might be rushing a little bit, but I'm just in the interest of the time, I had to do it. But so the mapping is maintained in this Java class. Sorry, in this HBM XML. Okay. So here a property tag is used for mapping the properties, and then ID tag is used for mapping the primary key. Okay, so the primary ID is the primary key of that table, and and the same ID is the property of this Java class. Okay, table equal to course. Since the table, the names of the properties exactly match the names of the column names, I am not doing a mapping here. Otherwise, I'll have to do if column equal to, I have to specify nm. So if let's say my course table has a column nm and I want to map it with a property called name in course class, I do this way. Property name equal to name, but the column name is nm. nm is a column in the database, name is a property. But if I don't give anything, it will assume that, Hibernate assumes that your column names are exactly same as that of your property names. Okay, ID is just ID, primary key basically. Okay, and may not have time to talk about the generators. Okay, basically they are used for auto generating the primary key. Okay, instead of you inserting a value every time, you can use those generator algorithms. Okay, so basically here this is one of the key vital elements or component of Hibernate application. Okay, so where you specify the mapping between your Java classes and the database tables. Okay, there are a lot of things like if your tables are having one-to-many mapping relationships, basically associations they are called, right? One-to-many, many-to-many, many-to-one, all these relationships can be represented here in this, and you can have equivalent Java classes, Java Pojos created. Okay, so that is all maintained in this hbm.xml file. Okay, and the next important thing is about jdbc.properties. Okay, so where you specify the username, password. So this is about my MySQL database. Okay, the MySQL database that is running on my machine. The username and password is root and root. Okay, this will be used by this application to connect to the MySQL database. Okay, and then form.xml is used by Maven for adding the projects of adding the required jars, required libraries for my project. Right, since this is a Maven project, I have it here. And then the most important thing, application config.xml. Okay. So here is where you specify all the beans. Okay. So here, if you see this, right, I'm creating a data source. I hope you all understand what a data source means. Right, I'm creating a data source here and taking the properties from values from the properties file. Okay, and then need to create a session factory, Hibernate session factory. Okay, for which you provide a session factory. This is a standard way of creating a session factory, where for which you need to provide the mapping XMLs, HBM XMLs, and also few of the Hibernate properties. Okay, so this dialect property is something that drives or that decides uh, uh, which database basically your application is connecting to. Okay, let's say tomorrow, as I said, right, if you want to switch from one database to another database, it is very easy with Hibernate. It is controlled basically using this property, dialect. Okay, if you want to switch to an Oracle database, you can same database, same code, just provide org.hibernate.dialect.oracle dialect and provide your Oracle database server details with your username and password. Your application is going to work as is. You don't have to make one line change as well. You don't have to make any change. You work directly. Okay. Okay, and then you have one bean called course down. Okay, so you will have your DAO classes where you will write your database handling logic, right? Wherever you want to do your queries, database interactions in a way, right? They're all done in DAO classes. So you create that bean of DAO bean in this XML and inject. This is called injection, dependency injection. So Hibernate template is injected into DAO. And if you see course DAO, right, you will be using Hibernate template, right? But you are not creating an instance of Hibernate template. You are just using it. If you see Hibernate template.save, you are calling a save method. Hibernate template.update. Let's say if I don't use Spring and I run this program, what will happen? Right? Hibernate template.save. You are not initializing it with anything. You would get a null pointer exception here, right? If you are not using Spring, you will get a null pointer exception, right? But what Spring does is it will inject an object of Hibernate template into this course DAO at runtime. As soon as you start up, application startup, Spring starts a container in your JVM and loads or creates all these beans that are specified in your XML. Okay, all these beans are created and injections are done. Okay, so for example, first it will create this bean. Okay, what is this bean? DS bean. What will it do? DS bean, it will just stay. The DS bean will stay. Okay, and then it will create my session factory bean. Then what does it do? Okay, my session factory bean is created. Okay, but this my session factory bean is not just left like that. It is injected into Hibernate template, and this Hibernate template is injected into course DAO. So that's how you get a course. In the course DAO, we have an Hibernate template injected, and into this Hibernate template is your session factory injected. So all this linkage already happens by the time your application starts up. Okay, that's what Spring does. That's what dependency injection is. Okay, so when you call save and on course, right, you don't have to write a query, right, insert into course or save, right? I'm talking about save. Yeah, you insert into course values and you don't have to pass values. You don't write any query. Save is a method that automatically creates a record in the database. Okay, and that what will the record contain? The data contained in this course will be automatically mapped and populated into that record in the database. Similarly is the case with update, delete. Okay, so basically what it means is the frequently used functions are directly available for you for your disposal, right? If you want to use so CRUD operations, right? Create, update, read, delete. All these are operations that frequently you perform on any database. So all these operations are provided as methods by Hibernate. Okay. Okay, so in addition to this, right, if I just do control space on Hibernate template, right, I would get all the other options that I have with I'm sorry, multiple other options that you can do with Hibernate template. If you see this, for all these things, right, you would be writing a lot of code, or if you have to do it using JDBC. See, bulk update, right, and then you have delete, and you have find, and then find by criteria, find by example, okay, right, find by named query, find by, there is something called find by ID, which you would log using it, okay, and then you have load, lock, merge. So basically each and every method has a specific purpose. Okay, save or update, save or update, right? Save will just save the record into the database. Save or update means if the record is not existing, it will create. If it is existing, it will update. Okay, you can just call a save or update and pass an object. It will update if it is existing, and so you don't have to do anything. If I have to do the same thing, save or update functionality using JDBC, how would I do it? I'll have to write the code, whole code to what? First you have to try to retrieve. If it is present, then update, else insert. So all this is done. It's already done. It's taken care. You just have to pass your object to that save or update, and it takes care of it. So imagine the life now. You don't have to create a connection object. You don't have to create a driver manager or get connection. You don't have to close the connection each and every time you want to create. You want to insert a record into the database, right? And the beautiful part here is when you retrieve the data, right? You get a result set which is very hard to iterate, right? But here you get the you get the returned data in the form of objects. You pass an ID, you get an object. You get a course object. You don't get a result set here. You get a course object, which you can directly map to your DTOs, or you can pass it to front end. You can do whatever you want to. But so ideally, what you do is to get a result set, iterate through the result set, and then populate your user-defined object onto the result set, right? Which you don't have to do. You don't have to do with using Hibernate. Okay. So okay, I forgot to show you the course down. Oh, I shown you, right? So is there anything that I have not shown you in the demo? Test class. So to execute this, right, I first have to load this configuration XML where all the beans. So I told you, right, the first application startup, you will have the Spring container gets initiated, and all the objects will be created. All the beans in that Spring XML will be created. So that's what this particular line does. The first line of your main method, that's what it does. It will create the Spring container and create all the objects, all the beans that are present in that XML, and then you should not do course DAO equal to new course DAO, because you would not get Hibernate template injected if you do new course DAO. If you want Hibernate template injected, you have to do it this way. You have to get the object from the Spring container. Okay. You have to get it from the Spring container and not by just doing a new course DAO. Okay, so then I just create a course object and then another course object, and then I call save course and an update course. Okay, so which basically these methods actually create a record, insert a record, and then update the record in the database. So this is about the demo, right? Even if you have any questions on the demo, right, just put it on the chat or the questions section. We can go over that. Okay, so I'm just going on to the questions. There are a lot of them. I'll try to answer. Okay, so from the beginning, um, for everyone's benefit, right? I'll just read out the questions, right? One of the questions is when we need to use AOP in our application. When do we need to use AOP in our application? Please provide real-time example at least at the end of the session. Sure. Um, okay. The rest of them are questions. Okay. Okay. So basically, when do you want to use AOP? Right? AOP is used when you want to do something across the application. Let's say one small example, one simple, very realistic example. Okay, let's say you do write a lot of methods, right? In Java, you write a lot of methods. Okay, and if you're deploying the application, right? If the user logs in, right, he will your flow will go into multiple methods, right? Your application flow will go into multiple methods. It has to go through all these methods, and then you get a response, right? So if there was an issue, right, what you do is you go back to your logs and try to understand in which method did it fail, right? In those cases, usually for debugging purposes, what you do is to add logging statements, right, at the beginning of the method and the end of the method, right? So you add a log statement at the beginning of the method, end of the method, beginning of the method, end of the method, right? This is something repetitive done across the application, just for your debugging purposes, right? This is one cross-cutting concern. So this can be addressed using AOP. One example, right? In addition to this, right? Let's say you want to do exception handling, right? You can do it using AOP. You want to implement security, right? You want to because security is something which you want to apply across the application, not just for one page or one functionality, right? You can use AOP in that case as well. So when you see a occasion where an instance where a particular thing has to be done at multiple places in your application, and not multiple, almost across the application, then you should usually go for AOP. So even transaction management can be implemented using AOP. Okay, I hope I answered that question. Okay, moving on to the next one. Can we write without ID tag? Okay, it is definitely possible or definitely valid. Writing without ID tag, Hibernate will still allow you to do that. That it is not a mandatory tag, but just that you will have to populate that value. If you do not use ID tag, right, you will have to use property tag. Right? You can do that, but you will have to populate that value when you want to insert data into it. For example, if I go back to our course DAO, okay, here itself. So here I am providing the ID. Here like we are providing the ID, right? So you will always have to provide this when you are using. If you are not providing that as an ID. Okay, so it's just kind of a mapping, right? A normal column and a primary key column are different, right? Similarly, ID tag and property tag is the distinguishing factor here in Hibernate world. That is all about it. Nothing special about ID tag. Hibernate still allows you to do without ID tag. Okay. The next question: if the table is not having primary key, what do we have to do in the mapping file? Yeah, this is the same answer as the first one. You don't have to. You will not have to create that ID tag. Okay, all the tags in your HBM XML will be property tags. Okay. And the next thing is repeat the linkage once. I need the details. Can you repeat the question? What linkage you mean? Can you be more detailed? Are you talking about Spring and Hibernate linkage, or if there is something related to transaction management that you are asking, can you just type it once again to Shashank? Okay. How to write a HQL? Okay, HQL is not part of our webinar today, but HQL is similar to how you write your SQL. Okay, so instead of it comes into picture in the DAO class, where instead of writing, Hibernate template dot update, right, you do something like this. So you specify, basically you provide the HQL here for this Hibernate template and get that executed, that HQL executed. Okay, so HQL is for writing user-defined queries. Like here, I am writing an update, but I want a specific update, or I want more specific retrieval. Right? I have a complex condition where you want to specify for retrieval. That's when you go for HQL. Okay. Just to move on. Annotation-based transaction control using at the transactional at service, is it good way? Right. So using at the rate transactional is one way of doing it, and the other way of doing it is to start a transaction, end a transaction, do a rollback, commit yourselves. Okay. I personally prefer using a transactional. Recommend that instead of you doing it manually. Okay, if you don't use at the rate transactional, you will have to start a transaction, begin a transaction, and then commit a transaction, roll back a transaction. All these operations have to be taken care by you. That's the reason why I would just declare at the rate transactional and let Hibernate and Spring take care of the transaction management. Okay, and the next question, if table is not having any primary key, what do we have in the mapping table? I answered that. XML versus annotations, which is good. There is nothing good, both are same. So whichever you are comfortable with, I would let you go ahead do that. And you can use them in combination as well. Like let's say an XML based is already being implemented in your project, you can still go ahead and use annotations. And so you can just use annotations, XML only, XML plus annotations, everything possible. No performance difference, but the go forward, if you want to stay ahead of the curve, go for annotations. But I am an XML guy again. Okay, then the question is not related with this demo, but I have from time. Do you have first or second level cache in your detached criteria in Hibernate? Right, very good question. Hibernate provides the feature of caching. There is a lot of research and progress on Hibernate world on the caching front. Okay, you have the API provides you good caching features. So yeah, it does. You have level 1, level 2 caches implementations available with Hibernate. You can do that. Okay, and then the next question is, in which layer transactions should start? The transactions should start in the service layer, or it could be at the database DAO layer. Okay, so usually it is at the DAO layer. So basically, you can do it at any level, but you have to decide on a relative, right? How long you should you want the transaction to be, how long you want to lock the resources, right? Let's say you want to simple example, right? I go back to my example of booking a movie seat, right? Movie ticket, right? As soon as I select the movie ticket, if I start the transactional, right? Transaction, right? A seat will be booked, right? As soon as I just select the movie, since okay, you assume that okay, one guy is actually started looking at the list of movies. Let me reserve a seat, That's not reasonable, right? That's not realistic also. So you should have the transaction demarcation. That's called transaction demarcation. You should have as less as possible, right? In a transaction, as you should have as less operations, as many less operations as possible inside a transaction. So it is suggested to use transaction management in the DAO layer so that you spend lesser time in the transaction. Okay, JPA is required to use between Hibernate and Spring. It is not mandatory. Use of JPA is not mandatory. You can just get the work done using Hibernate and Spring. Okay. Okay. Did I miss any questions? If yes, just please type them again. Else, if there are any more questions, I can take them. Okay. But I have gone through all the questions that I see on the questions text in the questions window. Okay. XML mapping one session factory example. Okay, sure. One second, guys. There are some questions. Can we have a bean object or request? Okay, there is something about suppress warnings. Suppress warnings is just to avoid Eclipse to show a false warnings. Just that annotation. It is not going to add anything to it, even if you add or not doesn't. That makes a bit of a difference. Okay, just ignore that. Okay, so there is a request for explaining the XML mapping once. I'll just go back to the XML mapping, HBM XML. So here basically we are mapping the table with the class, right? And then the properties of the class with the columns, right? Since the column names of the table exactly match with the properties, I have not specified the column names. Else I would specify the column names as well. Okay. Basically, if there is no primary key, I would use a property tag here also for the ID tag. And in addition to this, this is a very simple form of HBM XML, but there are a lot of variations or complex tags that we can attach or include in this XML. The other point that came up was to define the relationships, right? But let's say there is a course table and there is a student table, and there is a relationship between course and student table, and I can represent that same relationship in Hibernate. So, and that relationship is displayed or is depicted in this configuration XML, in this HBM XML. Okay, so yeah, I hope I explained you the XML mapping now. Any other questions on XML mapping? Or if not XML mapping on anything? Okay. Okay, then I hope this webinar has at least helped you understand these frameworks on a high level, right? And I hope you all at least got an overview of what I tried to explain here. Okay, yeah. So good luck with your opportunities and your work. Okay, and have a good day or good evening. Okay, you can actually post your questions if you have anything on this topic or any technology topic on Edureka forum, and you would get answers. right? And they get actually routed to the experts on the technology, and you get the questions answered. Okay, so thank you guys, and have a good night, good evening, bye.